Welcome everyone to One Avenue News. As we journey together, let's journey for solution and not confusion. United we win, my people, art of love.
Introduce himself individually, or should you wish for me to do so? Okay, I will do so. I'm joined today by Ambassador Sharon Miller. She's at my extreme left, Acting Chief Technical Director. Ambassador Esmond to my immediate left, he's the Undersecretary for Foreign Trade. Miss Julia Hyatt, Acting Undersecretary, Bilateral, Regional and Hemispheric Affairs Division. She's in the second row. Miss Cheryl Gordon, who is directly behind me, Acting Senior Director in the Foreign Trade Division. Mr. Andre Kaur, the head of our Legal Services Unit, my second left. And Mr. Sheldon Barnes, Acting Assistant Director of the Foreign Trade Division. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Pierce, and happy to have you here today, and we move straight into the report.
The Secretary did not accurately introduce herself. So she just said permanent secretary. She did not say permanent secretary ambassador, Sheila. So she should correct that for the record.
For the record.
Oh, I will so do. Ambassador Sheila Monteith, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and Head of the Jamaican Foreign Service.
Satisfied, member? Thank you. Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Internal and External Affairs Committee. It is our honor to address you on the Samoa Partnership Agreement. Hereinafter, we refer to it as the Samoa Agreement. We have already introduced the members of my team, but I also wanted to point out, Chair, that together we have spent cumulatively some 202 years in service to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of Jamaica, much of which have been involved in international negotiations, and I'm therefore quite privileged to serve this distinguished team. We've provided a background document in advance as requested, and so my remarks will therefore highlight some of the elements presented with any relevant elaboration or clarification. The Samoa Partnership Agreement is one of the myriad agreements for which negotiations on behalf of Jamaica have been led by the Foreign Ministry. The process in this instance followed the route of internal approval to proceed, consultation at all levels, active leadership and involvement, and adherence to principles and national considerations, as has been the tradition in the approach to all international negotiations. In the case of the Samoa Agreement, at the start of the process, Jamaica chaired at ministerial level the then ACP Council of Ministers, and therefore led the development of its negotiating mandate. Throughout the negotiations at both ministerial and ambassadorial levels, on behalf of the larger ACP and the region, Jamaica was integrally and actively involved in the development of the general part, as well as of the Caribbean EU Regional Protocol. On all occasions, fidelity to the national laws of Jamaica was paramount, and full respect for the process of engagement among nations of diverse interests and realities was observed. As part of Jamaica's internal process of entering international agreements, the comments and advice of the relevant ministries, departments, and agencies, as well as other non-governmental stakeholders, were considered before making commitments. As part of the negotiating process, due regard was given to Jamaica's domestic legal framework to ensure that there was harmony with the international obligations outlined in the agreement. Turning to the agreement itself, the Samoa Partnership Agreement is a legal arrangement between the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, which comprises 79 developing and least developed member states, and the European Union, comprised of 27 member states. Jamaica has been a member of the OACPS since its origins in 1975 as a group of African, Caribbean, and Pacific states, then called the ACP Group, under the Georgetown Agreement, to negotiate a trading relationship with European countries, then the European Economic Community. From what was principally a trade agreement under 4 Lomé Conventions, then a development cooperation modality under the Cotonou Partnership Agreement, now furthered into a full-blown partnership arrangement under the Samoa Agreement, the relations between the two sets of countries have proceeded for well over 4 decades. As a beneficiary, Jamaica has received critical development support from the European Union over this period, fostering a relationship which has become increasingly aligned with the priorities of the government, now grounded in Vision 2030. It bears mentioning that no social policy imposition was ever made by the EU pursuant to the Cotonou or any previous trading arrangement, and there's no reason to believe that this would be the case in the case of Samoa, given the emphasis on the principle of partnership. Negotiations on the Samoa Agreement began in September 2018. The chief negotiator on behalf of the OACPS was His Excellency Dr. Robert Doucet of the Republic of Togo on the ACP side, OACPS side. On the 20th of July, 2023, approximately 2.5 years later, after the agreement was initialed, EU member states received the necessary approval to proceed with its signing, which took place on 15th November 2023 in Samoa. Some states opted to sign the agreement in advance. Others, like Jamaica, which were completing domestic processes, utilized the post-signing facility. Jamaica became a signatory to the Samoa Agreement on the 14th of December 2023 and deposited an interpretive declaration to the agreement at the time of signing. The Samoa Agreement is being provisionally applied since 1st of January this year, as further legal procedures are required before it can enter fully into force. I should point out that provisional application means that signatories are able to participate in the development programs. For non-signatories, they are unable to do so until after such period following their signature or ratification taking effect. As is the case with most international agreements, the Samoa Agreement is subject to ratification, and in this case by at least 53 member states of the OACPS. Accordingly, it will enter into force on the first day of the second month following the date on which the EU and its member states and at least 2/3 of the OACPS member states have completed their respective internal procedures for that purpose and deposited their instruments expressing their consent to be bound with the General Secretariat of the Council of the European Union, which is the depository of the agreement. An OACPS member which has not signed and ratified the agreement within the time limits may become a party by way of accession until such time as they become a party. With respect to the current state of signature of the agreement, all 27 EU member states pre-signed the agreement in Brussels. Given that not all OACPS member states signed in Samoa, it was agreed that signing would be facilitated in Brussels until the 15th of May this year. On the 27th of March 2024, St. Lucia became the latest OACPS member state to sign, and as at the 2nd of April, 69 of 79 OACPS member states have become signatories to the agreement. Only 2 CARICOM countries are among them. Mr. Chairman, in view of the provisional application of the Samoa Agreement commencing on 1st of January this year, the EU has notified the OACPS members of the parts of the agreement that shall be provisionally applied. Consequently, there are some mandates at the level of the OACPS as well as the Council of Ministers of CARIFORUM that may be impacted by these developments. For example, countries not signatory to the Samoa Agreement will no longer be part of the partnership and will not be able to participate in the OACPS activities or programs, including of support for justice sector and climate change. Jamaica, for example, actively attends and participates in the OACPS Parliamentary Assembly and the OACPS EU Regional and Joint Parliamentary Assemblies. And I pause here to note that 2 members of your committee are, at this point, to be considered former members and current members of the institutional framework in terms of the parliamentary representation of the OACPS. The first session under the Samoa Agreement was held in Luanda, Angola from the 17th to the 21st of February, And it will be recalled that the Caribbean group elected Mr. Heroy Clark, MP, Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, as co-president of the Caribbean EU Regional Parliamentary Assembly during its 64th session. Member states not signatory to the Samoa Agreement were not able to participate in this meeting of the Joint Parliamentary Assembly. Permit me, Mr. Chairman, to speak a little on the attributes of the agreement itself. The Samoa Agreement is aimed at modernizing the framework to guide political and economic cooperation and will form part of the overarching legal framework for partnership between the 79 member states of the OACPS and the 27-member European Union for the next 20 years. It targets generating mutually beneficial outcomes on common and intersecting interests and in accordance with the parties' shared values. The parties have agreed that the accord shall contribute to achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement adopted under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change as overarching frameworks guiding the partnership. The agreement consists of a general part, 3 regional protocols, and annexes. The general part and the 3 regional protocols, the African Protocol, the Caribbean Protocol, and the Pacific Protocol, all cover several strategic priorities. The agreement also establishes an international and institutional framework to monitor implementation. Specifically, the parties have agreed to establish institutions at the level of the members of the OACPS and the EU. The parties have also agreed to establish as joint institutions for each of the regional protocols a Council of Ministers, a joint committee, and a parliamentary assembly. Key areas of cooperation in the Caribbean EU Regional Protocol include fighting against the devastating effects of climate change with a special attention to small island states, advancing economic transformation and diversification, focusing on key sectors such as the blue economy and connectivity, as well as new sources of growth, promoting comprehensive citizen security strategies, governance, including financial governance, and increasing investment in human and social development. The agreement is expected to impact over 1.5 billion people worldwide, the largest of its kind. It has the potential to tackle the most pressing challenges that each region faces specifically, using the modality of strengthened cooperation among them. The commitment to strengthening their cooperation in multilateral fora, already being pursued in areas such as climate change, was a significant advance in the Samoa Agreement. The agreement has also institutionalized engagement with stakeholders. Mr. Chairman, over the course of the negotiations, issues of particular interest to some countries emerged with differing levels of support. This was consistent with positions advocated by groups and individual countries in international negotiations on development agreements since the early 2000s on issues related to the environment, human settlements, population, financing for development, and social development, among others. Some of the most controversial matters, a recurring theme in such negotiations, relate to issues of sexuality, abortion, and the rights of particular groups of persons. During its negotiations, both within the ACP group as well as with the EU, the Jamaican delegation was careful to remain within the ambit of language which had previously been agreed to by it and which was captured in existing international agreements. Given the heightened interest in the positions which it had thus reaffirmed, the assurance is given that the defense of the national position was an important feature of the delegation's approach. For additional element of assurance, on the occasion of its signature, an interpretive declaration was deposited confirming that Jamaica's implementation will be in line with its domestic legal and policy framework. It is important to highlight that Jamaica's partnership with the EU remains an important pillar of its foreign and domestic policy, and its engagement in this framework is based on shared objectives and principles. For more than 4 decades, under the varying frameworks, the EU has supported Jamaica's economic growth and development and resilience building initiatives through intervention programs in key areas, including health, agriculture, environment and climate change, citizen security and justice reform, and more recently, digital transformation. These programs have made a qualitative difference in the lives of many Jamaicans, including vulnerable groups such as people with disabilities, women, and youth. The EU is the largest provider of grant assistance to the country and is an important source of investment for Jamaica, as well as Jamaica's fourth largest trading partner. If Jamaica had chosen not to sign the agreement, access to existing development financing in key areas would have been affected, as a primary legal basis for that cooperation, particularly for the EU internal mechanisms, would have been impacted. In this regard, it is noted that non-parties to the agreement would have limited access to development funding while the bilateral relationship would still be maintained. The European Development Fund has been the EU's main instrument to finance development cooperation with African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. It has financed projects or programs which contribute to the economic, social, or cultural development of the recipient country. Significant development programs such as the 11th EDF, National Indicative Program 2014 to 2020 for cooperation between Jamaica and the European Union, valued at €46 million, were drawn up in accordance with the provisions of Articles 2 and 4 of Annex 4 to the Cotonou Agreement. Cumulatively, Jamaica has received over €1.2 billion in development financing from the European Union. In 2021, the EU approved a new financing arrangement, the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument in DK Global Europe, which has effectively replaced the EDF. Under this instrument, Jamaica is one of only 6 Caribbean countries that have received funding for a national multi-annual indicative program. This is an indication of the strength of our partnership and of the EU's trust up to this point in our commitment to using the support effectively, the alignment of our approaches and governance structures. The amount of €30 million was allocated and approved for the period 2021 to 2024 for projects in 4 areas: sustainable cities, urban renewal, governance and human citizen security and support measures, and digital transitioning. The NDK midterm review due in 2024 may result in additional resources under Jamaica's national multi-annual indicative program. In addition to its national MIP, Jamaica also stands to gain from the various initiatives being pursued under the Caribbean window of the NDK Global Europe. Mr. Chairman, international agreements are given effect through domestic law and policy. While Jamaica commits to cooperation on issues of joint importance, it continues to maintain sovereignty in its decision-making. Collaboration on issues of joint importance is a feature that was also present in the Cotonou Agreement. Mechanisms such as the joint OACPS-EU Council provides a forum to discuss and agree joint actions as appropriate. An example of this joint action would be in respect of climate change. The provisions of the agreement outline its commitments to partnership and shared values. For example, Article 1(4) of the agreement notes that, quote, partnership dialogue and action tailored to the specificities of the parties shall constitute the main tools to achieve the objectives of the agreement, unquote. Further, Article 1(5) provides that this, quote, agreement shall facilitate the parties' adoption of common positions on the world stage, reinforcing partnerships to promote multilateralism, unquote. Importantly, the article outlines that the parties agree that the objectives of the partnership dialogue shall be to exchange information, foster mutual understanding, and facilitate the establishment of agreed priorities and shared agendas at the national, regional, and international levels. We anticipate that the essential elements, that is, respect for human rights, democratic principles, the rule of law, and non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and the fundamental element, that is, good governance, of the new OACPS-EU agreement will be on the agenda of the political dialogue to be undertaken at all levels with the EU. Jamaica's participation in the dialogue will continue to be informed and guided by its domestic, legal, and policy mandates. As it relates to fundamental freedoms, it is noted that these will not be undermined by the agreement. Subject to the exceptions and conditions it identifies, Section 13(2) of the Constitution limits the ability of Parliament or any organ of the state to act in a manner that would infringe on the rights enumerated. Jamaica therefore intends to implement the agreement consistent with its laws. So as I close, Chairman and members of the committee, I trust that this introduction, which complements the written submission, has been helpful in sharing information with the committee on this important development in the relations with the European Union. We are now at your disposal for any question or comments. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam P.S. I think your report was quite comprehensive, and I believe that it will allow us to release you very early, minimizing the questions that may be asked. But before I ask my committee members to raise any questions or observations, I just want to ask one question. I don't know if I overheard, but you mentioned the issue of various timelines in which the various countries were allowed to, whether to do preliminary signing and so on. But I don't think I hear from you as to at what point did Jamaica sign the agreement.
Thank you, Chair. We signed on the 23rd of December. The 23rd? Sorry, the 15th. 23rd is just before Christmas. The 14th of December.
The 15th.
Yes, it is in the document, and I did read that. The 14th of December.
Yes, I say I may have overheard.
We signed before the close of the year.
Okay. Okay. All right. Member Jackson.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, you told the PS that she could leave here soon. I don't think the Ministry of Finance is in a haste to leave the Parliament at all. So, they're having a whole session, I won't say the whole day, to be here. But like you, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the PS for giving that summary report. And indeed, it is a summary and not the full report with all the pertinent details therein. And I would want to ask Mr. Is the full signed agreement on the internet?
It is available. Yes, it is.
It's available now?
Yes, it is.
I tried it some time ago and I had a little difficulty.
I can share a copy with you.
I'll be grateful for that.
Not at all.
But to put a little context to it, but before I proceed, I want the committee to extend its congratulations to our colleague member on the committee who have ascended to the co-chairmanship of the partnership. Mr. Chairman, it was and is important to have this dialogue in the Parliament. Because the truth is, in your comment you mentioned about 2 members who have served, and that I happen to have been one of them at some journey in my life. And one of the ongoing shortcomings, not just now but before, is that though you have a parliamentary assembly, throughout the ACP, less so with the EU, there have not been much dialogue in the constituent parliaments and much of the proceedings in the assembly, the joint assembly, and within the context of the agreement, both at the ministerial level and at the parliamentary level. It's something that we have struggled with in order to have the parliament more integrally involved in the provisions and the execution of the agreement. That said, you made the point, P.S., of the genesis of this agreement started from the Lomé Convention, which was essentially a trade agreement, and it has evolved over a period to take on many different facets. And the truth be told is that that was driven more on the European side, who were very reluctant in providing financial support to member countries around issues that they don't necessarily concur with. So there's been a long-standing resistance on the EU side in the broad trade facilitation and the other development assistance program, infrastructure development and budgetary support and all those other financial support. So it has evolved with that agenda driven by that side. And no doubt that has reflected in the Samoa agreement that goes more in the social policy side or social issues, for which, particularly in Europe, those have developed more currency now than before. Against that background, it was more imperative that there was more local discussion, perhaps prior to the signing of the agreement, in order to deal with apprehensions that arise during the negotiating period, because there are many social issues in Europe that many ACP countries, Jamaica included, there is no concurrence, right? And this is one of the things I'd like you to affirm or clarify for me. As I listen to the presentation, I get a sense that the agreement is not a all or none. You know, if you don't agree to implement certain provisions, then there are certain things that you can't participate in, rather than if you don't agree to everything, then you can't participate in anything at all. That was one of the summary conclusions. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's one of the extrapolations I was coming out of. Whether or not in the overall provision there is, if you don't agree with this, then you don't have to agree with it. If you don't want to implement this provision that is asked for in the agreement. That is one. This recent agreement has been dominated, as I said, with more, at least publicly, with more the social issue contents than the other traditional elements, which is the trade facilitation, development support, such as infrastructure, justice, health, and other areas that we have gotten support from, education, etc. One of those I want to ask about PS, particularly trade facilitation. Could you give a sense of any significant development or facilitation over and above what existed in respect to trade, Jamaican products, Jamaican services? For example, one of the areas we're struggling with in the past is in the services and, for example, tourist workers, which we have a developed sector in, being able to participate, get visas to go into European countries to be employed in their industry. And I know Member Clark would have special interest in that, given that his constituency is in the heart of the tourist industry, where many persons would have had much experience, training, and so on, and would want to, utilize opportunities in the European market. A good evidence of that is that all members of Parliament on both sides of the aisle took the Minister of Labour to task about the non-inclusion of female workers into the hotel program as it used to be. There's a big appetite to facilitate female overseas employment. So I want to give a sense of that for the trade and the facilitation of services and the whole question of visa for persons in the, not only in the tourism but also in the arts, right? That there has been over time, it may have changed, welcoming the update on that. Thirdly, and in the area of trade, and let me declare some interest. The cannabis industry in Jamaica is one of the areas of potential growth, and mainly for the export market. In Europe, there are some countries that have legalized framework for both the use of cannabis, and by extension, I don't know what the facilitation is for trade to be able to supply that product in their market. Germany is one that has recently, I know the UK, they are considering local legislation for that, and they're, well, UK is not a part of the EU anymore, so that's a separate kettle of fish. But in a couple other European countries, name elude me just now, that have local legislation for the use of cannabis, and for which Jamaican cannabis industry could also participate. So if you could just touch on those for me. I have a couple more, but I don't want to give you a long list one time.
You may proceed, PS.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Member. And thank you for the observations and the questions which you have made. Let me just, in a very general way to begin, to acknowledge what you have said, the importance of the involvement at a parliamentary level, and in fact of the involvement of the institutional parliamentary framework in the development of the Samoa Agreement. I think your colleague will recall that there were instances in which the opportunity was given to the OACPS parliamentary group to provide comments, and these were taken on board. And I very happily recall that one of the things that we looked forward to as Caribbean negotiators was when the meetings were held, and this would have been pre-COVID, of course, that there would be a meeting with the Caribbean parliamentary groups so that we could benefit from their own position on this. And might I also jump over to the other side to indicate that for its part, the EU Parliament, in fact, if I might qualify it as, was moved in a direction which was in advance of its own membership at the political level, and provided great support to the development of the negotiations, and actually fueled the pace at which it was conducted. So we continue to hope and look forward to the leadership that will be given by the parliamentary groups, both in terms of the OACPS and also at the joint level, because the role remains important. In terms of the commentary on whether it is an all or none, or whether it is that there is the view that you can take elements and to the extent that is possible, you may be able to implement those. I would point to what you have also alluded to as an advance in the approach towards the partnership, which towards the agreement over previous one, in that it's the incremental move towards it being a partnership, which means that there is a greater voice that is given to the decision making by both sides. I think it's fair to admit that developing countries, those in the OACPS, have matured, have become sufficiently aware of their own needs and the circumstances that would lead them to promote and to defend those. And it was very evident in the negotiations that the emphasis on a partnership was such that there is no indication that there are issues that are going to be imposed on us against our will, and for which we would not be able to stand up to them. It is quite the custom in international negotiations, when you see a reference to a phraseology such as appropriate, it's an indication that you will only go so far as it accords with your own ability to pursue a particular action. And so we have relied heavily on that strength and that conviction that we cannot go further than our parliaments, our constitution, and our countries will allow. So there is much that is in this agreement, and you are correct to say that there has been a heavier emphasis on the development of our social framework in tandem with what is happening internationally. And as I pointed out in my introduction, we have moved from the strict trade agreements of Lomé, moved to the introduction of the development cooperation modality under Cotonou, and now this partnership has allowed us to take on issues that are far-ranging in terms of the promotion of social and human development in this agreement. So I think that countries, members of both groups, will find within it elements that will allow them to pursue their own national development within the agreement, and which clearly has informed their ability to subscribe to it, to the point where of the 79 developing countries, only 10 have not yet signed the agreement and are at various stages in their national processes of moving there, and all 27 of the EU countries have done so. You raised the matter of trade facilitation and whether this has been an area that has been supported by the agreement. And your third issue had to do specifically with the cannabis industry. I'm going to ask my colleague, Ambassador Esmond Reid, and I do so with the preface that, as you may recall, the trade facilitation issues in the relationship with the EU, or the relationship between the EU and the OECPS, were carved out and placed under the EPA, the Economic Partnership Arrangements. So you will not find any extensive trade references. There are facilitatory actions, which, because we can't separate seamlessly what happens on the various fronts of our development pursuits. But in terms of what is happening on the trade side, work in progress, and you specifically identified, for example, visas, I'm going to turn to Ambassador Reid and to ask him to comment. Chair, you could facilitate the microphone.
Yes, you may proceed, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members. And thank you, Permanent Secretary. As Permanent Secretary highlighted, indeed, the trade that between the CARIFORUM countries and the EU is governed by the CARIFORUM EU EPA, which was concluded in 2008. And you highlighted some of the areas, especially in the, trade, as you know, is based on dealing in goods and services. So, well, of course, the trade was being undertaken prior to the EPA, as you highlighted in the whole Lomé relationship. And that was largely commodity-based. Of course, it has evolved over time, and we have now new products that are being introduced. And happily, we can say that we have been able, from Jamaica's side, to introduce new items into the trading relationship. We are doing seafood exports into the EU. We are doing various agricultural products, mangoes and things like that. And on the services side, which you highlighted, indeed, you mentioned in the area of the arts, we have a very strong program underway. Many of our musicians have a very active presence in the European market, especially during the summer period. There are so many reggae festivals that are held all over Europe, and so they're very much actively engaged in that. You mentioned tourism, of course. We have been growing the tourism market from the EU, and we have, various European companies who have been participating in that. And you mentioned visas. that is an area which continues to be a point of discussion between us and the EU representatives within the framework of the of the EPA. Because there are various bodies, there's a joint council, there's a trade and development committee, there are various bodies that we actively utilize to press for greater access to our services providers to be able to more effectively access the market. Of course, there are various challenges which continue to limit this scope for access. You're talking about things like standards, and you have international standards as well as private standards, which sometimes act as a constraint. But all of these are part of the dialogue and the conversation, which is ensuring that we reflect the concerns and the challenges that we have, so that the European side can be more appreciative of where we want to go. So it remains a very active conversation, and one which we are determined to see more growth and expansion for our stakeholders in accessing the EU market. Thank you.
Just
All right, I should address the cannabis question as well. Well, as you know, cannabis is a product which is governed by a plethora of international agreements. And so, based on the existing domestic legislation as well as international agreements, there are prohibitions on the export of this particular product. As you know, we have made strides at the domestic level in terms of making it accessible. So, but in terms of the export side, we are constrained and governed by various international agreements, which so far would not allow for the export. But it remains an international issue. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Ambassador Reid, just to follow up on a couple of points. Let me start with the last one about the international agreements and prohibitions as it relates to exports. As I understand it, yes, there are international agreements. Insofar as Jamaica is concerned, the government, I don't know if it's the Ministry of Industry and Commerce or the CLA itself, maintains that, well, we have a regulatory arrangement for the cultivation and sale and use of cannabis in Jamaica. And for the cultivation, standards and so forth, that must be adhered to. Insofar as export is concerned, my understanding is that that is governed and restricted by the receiving country and their local legal framework. That said, my question is, insofar as countries, and I'll just pick on one, Germany, for example, since we're dealing with Europe, that have a local industry, and in the context of our trade, as I understood it, where our commodities in the past entered their market because they are using those products in their market, and the trade development was to enable commodities in other countries, which were formerly colonies of the European Union, to be able to participate in their local market. Hence the duty removal and other entry facilitating provisions, so that commodities from ACP countries can have smoother access and participation in those. That said, Ambassador, insofar as a country like Germany that has local, which they have a legal framework for it, is there any attempt being made for Jamaican cannabis to participate in that local member state of the EU with that commodity which is not legal there? You know, we couldn't try to enter there with an illegal product. Indeed, There are standards. It obtained, for example, in our fisheries industry, conch, right, where we had to pass legislation here in order to ensure that the conch going into the EU meets the standards there. So I'm expecting in a similar way, because they eat conch over there, but they have a local society to protect health-wise, and so they establish phytosanitary regulations that the conch living here must adhere to. It's in a similar fashion. I'm inquiring, is that to the extent that cannabis is a consumable product in a country like Germany and others, I think it's, can't remember the other country, Amsterdam.
Netherlands.
Yes, the Netherlands, where it's legal. Isn't in our interest, within the context of partnership, fair trade because we import their products too, right? And so we want to export ours, that if it is standards, say what the standards are, and next, allow our products to participate in that economy. So I hear you about the international standards and agreement, but they are specific. There are specific laws, regulation in each jurisdiction, and are we or will we seek? Because the truth of the matter, Ambassador, they are not going to open their doors very readily. Sometimes you have to push it. And you have to push it in the context of an agreement, of a partnership, which we have. It is within that context that we have to. It's one of the arguable points on an ongoing basis between ACP countries and EU, in that their products can easily come to our country. For example, we're talking about cannabis. We had the other day where a shipment of cannabis came from Canada, right? But yet Jamaican cannabis can't go into Canada because of their local regulations. We don't want any European products to come here freely, and ours can't go there freely. Again, in the context of fair trade and reciprocity in those arrangements. So you speak about trade, international agreements and regulation in a generalized way. I want to bring it more specific to certain commodity, specific to certain jurisdiction within the EU, because not all of them have local legislation that permits the use of it. So I don't want to go into the generalities. I want to stick with some specificity.
Thank you, Member Jackson. And certainly, as you have highlighted, there are different countries that have expanded their domestic legislation to address the whole treatment of certain commodities such as cannabis. And certainly here in Jamaica, there are specific ministries, departments, and agencies that have, they have the policy responsibility for treating. Of course, we have the Cannabis Licensing Authority, you have the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, which has the policy. So I know they have been in dialogue with different stakeholders on how to treat with the matter. Perhaps my colleague, Mr. Kaur, could also speak to aspects of the domestic legislative framework, which we are governed by in treating with this matter.
Sorry, no, man, I want clarity. Just to help Mr. Kaur in furthering that response, because you touched on another area that I was interested in too, but as it relates to a specific one for trade. The whole relationship between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the respective local ministries in particular areas. You don't deal with implementation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You deal with leading the negotiations, making the agreements, and then you actually shift it over to the pertinent ministry for implementation. I want to, as Mr. Kaur is about to answer the question, is if he can give an assessment as it relates to trade, the level of utilization in the various areas covered in these agreements. You know, for example, Madam Pierce, you mentioned in the $30 million allocated and approved for the period 21 to 24 of the 30 million digital transformation, sustainable cities, urban, and so forth. To what extent these funding have been utilized in the respective areas? I really want to get a sense of follow-up, because the truth is, across political administration, this has been one of the things where you hear about so much funding allocated for that, and then you look at the expiration of the period, the utilization is relatively low for whatever reason, right? So as Mr. Kaur speaks to that particular one, I would like to get a sense of that.
Just before you respond, I just want to take this opportunity to welcome teacher and students from the AVI-NUE High School in St. Mary. We welcome you to, and I hope you enjoy this sitting. Thank you. You may.
Thank you, Chairman. Because of the breadth of the question, I will take this on. Mr. Kaur is our senior legal officer, and he also has a relationship with the Cannabis Licensing Authority. So it was on that basis. But I think you already made the point that you were not speaking to the various international schedules and agreements that would inhibit. You wanted to know what the prospects were for us to look at it in terms of the trade facilitation measures. And so we take that on the advisement. The larger issue is, and you yourself admitted to that, is that our role, while complementary of the work of other entities, we are responsible for what we call the intersection between national and international relations. So yes, we engage in international negotiations of trade agreements. We continue to defend and promote them. We identify areas and we work with other regions and governments when there are these gaps that need to be fulfilled. We work along with these entities in the assessment and the overview of the effectiveness of agreements. Where it comes to an assessment of how the EU's work in areas that have been critical to trade facilitation or in any of the areas that relate to promoting Jamaica's interest, economic interest, we did not come prepared with that data, and I will admit that, but the best place to find that agreement is from the PIOJ. Because in fact, the PIOJ has primary responsibility for development. It is a main organ for the channeling of development assistance to Jamaica, whatever the source of the donor, of the donor contribution. And PIOJ would have that information in terms of what projects may have been developed and the amounts that have been provided by the EU that would have helped us in terms of the whether technical capacity, whatever the nature of the engagement, that would have facilitated that. But certainly, just in terms of the level of support that we have gotten over the years and the breadth of the support from the EU, there would have been substantial impact. What I can say to you, and this is just by way of drawing an analogy, is the work that our ministry does in terms of direct facilitation of trade, investment, and related activities through what is considered our economic diplomacy program, introduced in partnership with JAMPRO. But our missions overseas have been targeted, and we have ongoing engagement with JAMPRO so that we are very clear on what our structures as a mission, as an embassy, will allow us to do in terms of the targeting, providing information to potential investors, and to move from the realm of the theory into very practical ways. I can share with you that matters relating to the registration of coffee farmers, the promotion of, through webinars, through sessions, through think tanks, putting the JACRA, putting MIC in contact with the private sector engagement, private sector entities in China has reaped enormous benefit in the increase in the opportunities for export. We do that with Japan. In other jurisdictions, we have hosted sessions with the stock exchange. We have done that with other private sector companies here. We have done that with our JIPRO to provide information to external parties who have an interest in investing and in trading. So the Foreign Ministry has a very clear idea of the areas in which it operates. And I'm going to use the word which you use, which is precisely what we do, is we facilitate. And that is very critical to our work and is now embodied in our economic diplomacy program, which is an important area of the pursuits of the ministry.
Member Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me first say a warm welcome to the members from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to include the Permanent Secretary, Madam. I also am seeing my very good friend and schoolmate. We met in Brussels. He's much younger than I am, but we met in Brussels. He was one of my chaperones, so to speak, while I was in Brussels. He's a Cornwallian, for you too. And so, Mr. Chairman, we are very happy to have you here. You are giving us some information that is very informative. And so we really want the Jamaican public to understand what this Samoa agreement is. And I hope that they will take this little piece and go Google the information. I hope it is on the website, that they won't have any problem in searching and getting the information, Mr. Chairman, because often, well, ever since I've been a member of the OACPS, you have been going off on people from time to time asking, what is it all about? And so it is at this time that I encourage them to read as much. I must also say welcome to the student and staff from the Iona High School in St. Mary, the Member of Parliament, Bobby Montague, Robert Bobby Montague, have always spoken highly of this high school. I hope they will be living up to that expectation. So we welcome you once again. But Mr. Chairman, my colleague has, in his deliberation, has said so many different things that you're unable to really follow. But I just want to make one correction, one clarification. The matter of female workers, as he mentioned, was not about the hotel program. It was about the farm working program that we spoke about as it relates to female not being readily accepted, and not really the hotel, because you do understand that in the hotel sectors, female are more accommodating in the different sphere of the whole work that takes place. But as it relates to the Samoa agreement, Mr. Chairman, at the OACPS, the Parliamentary Assembly, we have done extensive amount of work, and we are like the backroom workers. You hardly hear of us, but it's really the ministers, the ambassador, and the heads of states that really get the camera. And we understand, we are prepared to do the work. It is for that reason that we spend anywhere between 10 to 12 days on a track, really delving into the situation, hashing it out, and discussing the matter so that it makes it a lot easier for our ministers and heads of state and ambassador to carry on the work as they have done. And I must congratulate the ambassador team that has done yeoman's work where it is concerned in the form. One of the reasons that we took so long to sign, all the way up until the ninth moment, the ninth hour to sign the agreement, was that there were some conditions that was embedded in the agreement, and because of the country, the person, the culture that we practice here in Jamaica, it was not readily agreed to sign right away, and so the discussion, Madam Pierce, would have still be taking place up to the appointed time. But I am also happy that we have finally signed onto agreement. My colleague did mention about if you don't agree, then you can't sign that, and the PS did clarify the situation. It is a very ticklish situation, something that we really, many persons shy away from speaking about, as we do understand, but it is what it is. And when we are at the assembly, it can get very contentious, it can get very argumentative, because again, it is one person's norm as against another person's norms. It is a cultural thing. And so the work that has been done, we are seeing the fruit of it. The end result, Mr. Chairman, is that Jamaica is in a position to continue to get the grants, the loans, the sponsorship as it is, because the main subject areas are really the climate change, the food security, terrorism, and that's other things embedded in the situation, Mr. Chairman. Many of the subject areas doesn't affect us readily as a country, Jamaica. One thing I can certainly say to you is that the climate change is what is really affecting Jamaica. And so even though terrorism is not something that is readily to Jamaica, but we do support our sister and brother countries when we are at the assembly. And so we get the same level of support, because at this time we really need that funding where climate change is concerned. The whole digital transformation is up right there also, Mr. Chairman. But once again, I want to say to us that we continue with the fight. On the other hand of it, Mr. Chairman, the fact of the matter is that the African continent has a large delegation. They're very vociferous, they're very forceful when it comes on to the negotiation. The Pacific and the Caribbean, we are not that great in numbers when we are there, because not many of the countries that are member states will turn up at these assemblies. More so that a few of them now are out in the cold, so to speak. Trinidad and Tobago, who was one of the force of the Caribbean, is not with us anymore, and so that is going to take a toll on us. But we continue, and we hope that we will be able to do the work accordingly as it is. We are now into 3 different groups, and I suspect that the Europeans did all of this, because part and parcel of the whole discussion, Madam Pierce, and you will know, is that they wanted to make sure that we split in 3 rather than having the one group per meeting, per assembly. We are now split into 3. And so it is always going to be the majority whenever you go for a vote on an issue. Notwithstanding all of that, at the last assembly in Luanda, Angola, we met as OACP that we will continue to support each other on a topic. And so we will, whatever the subject here, whatever the topic that is placed on the table, we will always discuss before we make a decision going into the EU or with the EU. The Samoa Agreement is a continuation from the post-Cotonou, and so it speaks to assisting the small island states, developing states, including the African, or some of the African countries. Mr. Speaker, there are a lot more that could be said. I doubt if I want to say all of that now, it would take a day or two, but I will yield to the Permanent Secretary, who I think has great knowledge of the situation, and have her speak more on it.
Thank you very much, Member Clark. I know that Member Johnson, you wanted to make an observation.
Just a few. But before I go on to the other things, I wanted to comment, and I'll just pick up on a point that Member Clark made of, which I want to suggest, Chairman, to you, and of course would need the participation of and support from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. One of the remit of this committee, as a parliamentary committee, is to provide a forum to ventilate the issues pertinent in our agreements on an ongoing basis. And I want to suggest that perhaps on a semi-annual basis, there is a review through this committee that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can provide, particularly on this one, because of its sensitivities. You see, PS, one of our remit as parliamentarians is to keep the citizenry abreast and to allay any concerns that they will have, provide a forum for dialogue and exchange. The absence of information and knowledge can be a major contributor to much that we don't desire. And I'm just humbly, simply saying that if we do that, and where any member of the society or group in the society can submit questions or issues of concern, have their parliament speak to them on those issues and issues that are considered sensitive, just as a modus operandi going forward. We have nothing to lose, but I think a lot to gain and a lot that is undesirable to prevent. So I'm positing that for the committee's consideration. You mentioned, Pierce, about the PIOJ's role in basically operationalizing the provisions of the agreement, or leading. Clarify on that. That is what I was deducting, but I stand to be corrected. Because my lingering concern and fear is that at an earlier time, there are many industry players who are not aware of opportunities that exist in agreements that you meaning your ministry, would have played an integral leading role in bringing about. And there is no point in having a reservoir of water while people are dying of thirst. So it is important that to the extent that these opportunities exist, the relevant industry groupings are aware, and indeed the citizenry as much as is possible. Not perfect, we're not going to get everybody knowing, but we must do our part to make sure that this information is available to them. And lastly, on that point, PS, I know you might be reluctant to want to play this role, but I have to lean on you. You, the ministry, when you toil hours, days and nights to lock up these agreements that can benefit Jamaica, I think it's important that you are abreast of the level of utilization of these provisions that you negotiate. periodically, whether it's again, twice a year or once a year or what have you. I don't like when I spend a lot of time and effort to do something for somebody and it goes to waste. It's like I waste my time. I invest time and effort towards the end, not for the academics of it or the formalities of doing it, but to get the results that you believe that can be attained and the benefit that can accrue from it. So that is, as I say, I know you might be reluctant to want to take on a task like that, but I think it is something worthy and to make even their staff feeling more fulfilled when they make sacrifices to do the work that they do.
May I, Chair?
Member Clark. You may proceed, Madam Pierce.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to use the opportunity to thank Member Clark for the contribution that he made. This is coming from the horse's mouth, and therefore it was important for us, the thoroughbred you, to hear from you, because you were there in the dispensation, as was Member Jackson for Cotonou, and you actually transitioned into the OACPS and the Samoa agreement. So in fact, you're a pioneer, and I imagine that at some point you'll be able to help us to have a better understanding of the differences, and clearly we hope advances, one over the other. Member Jackson, thank you so much. Let me just clarify that the PIOJ, which is an agency of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, that for the obvious reason in terms of being able to track the level of development assistance that comes into the country and to ensure that it is in your national accounting, to ensure also that it is in line with the development priorities, because the PIOJ also manages Vision 2030, or National Development Plan. So it is quite evident and quite seamless that PIOJ would have a handle on what is coming in from any of our donor communities and how it is being spent, and therefore how it is being managed and handled, and the accounting. For practical, so it's not that it implements, but that it is responsible for overseeing development assistance. It therefore has a very direct relationship in a practical way with the donor, in this case the European Union. And so when there are discussions about the multi-annual indicative framework, as obtains also with the UN, it's a similar situation that takes place. So there would be an understanding that in the distribution of funds and the receiving of funds and how they are actually dispensed, that the PIOJ is off. And in fact, the information we have about the 1.2 billion over the period is information which we secured from the PIOJ and which they would have readily available. I'd also want to mention that just in terms of and I agree with you that information is key, knowledge is key. The entire process of negotiating, being involved in an international agreement, arriving to a point of acceptance, consensus, and then signing, and whatever the process is to make it relevant for Jamaica, involve consultations at all levels. And depending on what the area of interest is, there will be those consultations. I'll introduce you, for example, if you are not aware, that there's an Interministerial Committee on Human Rights, which discusses the plethora of international human rights agreement, Convention on the Rights of the Child, Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, Convention, UDCHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So there are mechanisms. I'd also like to remind that decisions that are made for Jamaica to actually subscribe, sign, ratify, are made by a cabinet, which is comprised of ministers who govern various portfolios. So when there is a project that involves the Ministry of Agriculture that is receiving funding from the EU, it's not information that is available only to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. In fact, the whole matter of the project itself, how it is developed, how it will proceed, and what will be the outcomes would reside with the ministry, with that ministry, let's say Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, and the information about the amount that was involved with the EU is available to the Planning Institute of Jamaica. And yes, it's always helpful for us to know. As you will see, whenever there is a donation of some significance, we are involved, we hear, we see, and we know. Let me also point out something that we tend to forget, is that many of these donor agencies, including the EU, provide substantial support to civil society. That we would not have in our own accounting, but they do that with civil society organizations as well. It's part of their modality. That's the way their society operates, and that's how they operate here as well. So indeed, there is a broad stage, a broad plane, and what you're suggesting in terms of information being more readily available, it's always something that is worthy. Even as currently exists, it is available in, depending on the entities and the agencies. The Planning Institute, because of the various publications, Economic and Social Survey and other, and its own, the way in which it monitors the implementation of Vision 2030 and the midterm arrangements that we have, that is a source of valuable information. A very mature website is maintained, and regular press briefings to give an indication of how we are progressing in terms of meeting those standards and those who are able to assist us. So I am hoping that we have a better sense that the ministry tries to keep au courant, keep current with the various opportunities for it to be either a conduit, a medium, initiator, and certainly a facilitator for relationships that obtain with the EU in this case, but certainly with any other donor, whether it's an international donor such as United Nations or any of the UN agencies, WFP, PAHO, and also with bilateral donors. With those, we perhaps have a more intimate relationship, because many of the donations come as a result of our very direct intervention with the countries which are resident here or where we have our embassies, and therefore the ability to intercede, interact is that much more intimate. But I do believe that at the end of the day, you will agree we have had an excellent track record, and that in fact the information I share with you is that last year, the last financial year, we had 4.2 billion in donation, in receipts, on behalf of the government of Jamaica from the activities of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and we continue to be very proud of the progress that we're making in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, PS, Member Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And just to assist Madam PS, the configuration of the EU Parliament is not just members of Parliament per se, but members who have been elected by the various groups throughout the European Union itself, the European countries. And so you might find that from Norway or from Belgium, you may have 4 or 5 representatives in the assembly. And so what it does, it lends support, because she did make mention of the grants and support that civil society will get. And so a lot of green funding that we get comes from the fact that you will have a partner, so to speak, in the EU that is not really a political person, but a person elected to sit on the EU Parliament because of the groups that they support.
Circumvent some of the national governments. Yeah, that is one of the deliberate intent behind it. Just lastly, I'm going to pick up on Mr. Ambassador Reid's point about the trade issues, because that's where the tire really hit the ground. What are the particular impediments, if any? And two, what can or ought to be done to overcome those so that the various Jamaican industries can utilize the opportunities for trade. Trade translate in more jobs locally. Trade translate in more employment locally. Trade translate in more revenue into the local economy. So it is not an esoteric notion. It's a real issue that can lead to a different quality of life in various communities throughout Jamaica, to various socio-economic classes in Jamaica. And it's for those reasons and more, Ambassador Reid, that it is incumbent on us to hammer on those impediments or barriers so that we can utilize the opportunities that exist therein. So it's one, if we need to sit down in a more deliberate and specific way, we have to do that. And it's not just in the one that I mentioned of, but in other areas. Because I've seen it before, where many potential opportunities go on the wayside because they are not properly, I shouldn't say properly, sufficiently explored or pursued so that the benefits can accrue to us. So I won't deliberate on it here, but I will come back to you in terms of how we can get that going. But before I leave, I just want to pick the ministry's brain, and if you could just give us, with your permission, Chairman, a sense of what is happening in Haiti. But after we close this Samoa agreement issue, just for the benefit of where we are, Jamaica, they are our immediate neighbor, and there's a lot of sensitivities involved. We have people coming in, trickling from time to time, the instability there, and how we see it impacting on us.
Member Jackson, I was thinking about us contemplating a meeting to look at the Haiti issue. So I don't know if I think I would prefer for us to, and then have the ministry prepare, because we really want to go. Yes, definitely. Yes, Madam P.S., if you have any further comment that you want to make in closing. If so, if not, please indicate.
Let me thank you, Chair, and the members of the committee. And the Member Jackson made a proposal for us to share some more on the developments. He said perhaps every 6 months or so. We don't have a difficulty with that. Part of what we want to do is to help others to understand that Jamaica is not an island to itself, and so much of what we do is impacted by what happens externally, and in the reverse, what we do impacts others. We have a very proud tradition in the ministry. We were one of the first 4 departments of government at independence to have been established. And the work that we have done over these years has been tremendous, and many are not able to make the link between so much of what we do as a ministry and what is helpful to Jamaica and to advance Jamaica's cause externally through so many ways, or impact on decision making externally. I will share, Chair, that, as I said, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade was the chair of the Ministerial Council at the time of the development of the mandate for the ACP's participation in the negotiations. But what is not generally known is that we faced one of the greatest threats to the unity of the ACP at the time, when it was there was a move to remove Africa from the ACP, and it fell on the shoulders of the president, the foreign minister of Jamaica, to lobby, to move earth and heaven, to liaise, negotiate with others. And when we got to Togo, where the mandate was to be adopted, there was so much negotiation, so much that had to take place, and we were fearful that we would not have had a mandate. And that has gone down in the annals of the OACPS, and now OACPS, of what was done prior to, but culminated then in the efforts to do that. I had the pleasure of leading at the ambassadorial level and leading on some of the critical issues for the OACPS and also for the Caribbean Regional Protocol, for CARI Forum. And so we understand that in the give and take of negotiations, no country comes out getting perfectly what it wants. But there's a much bigger aim we all have, which is to look at the development of our countries and our people. And when we say people, we do that at the level of the individual persons whom we serve, which is that when we strike an agreement that looks at how we educate, when we strike an agreement at providing health, greater access to health, access to digital tools, when we want to look at farmers and how they're able to take on new technologies, and we try to win support from others who have the resources to be able to help us, this is significant. So we're always very proud of the work we do at the ministry. We lament that others don't sometimes spend the time to understand, and we know that we too don't ring our bells too much or push our agenda in such a way, because we are so modest about what we do. And we know that there is much more that lies ahead of us. But, we are open to avenues for ensuring that there is greater understanding of the role of a ministry as important as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, which has its tentacles externally, because we have a web of embassies and high commissions and consulates general and honorary consuls which serve Jamaicans wherever they are elsewhere. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your patience, your tolerance, for allowing us that opportunity. I just want to assure Mr. Clark, Member Clark, that as the embassy continues to help you, the ministry will continue to support, and we are open to hearing from you if there are points that you wish us to continue to advance on your behalf and vice versa. And Member Jackson, thank you so much always for your interest in the work that we do.
Thank you very much, Madam PS. You say you don't want to ring your bell. We'll ring the bell for you.
Oh, no, that was meant in the way in which it is understood that we didn't want to exalt our own self to our horns. And I hope that that is clearly understood.
Yes, clearly understood. Just to say that we are quite impressed with your presentation here today, and it has really informed the committee and helped us in our deliberations as we look at issues concerning our foreign trade and our connections with countries that we are associated with. We are very pleased with the presentation and happy to have you. I see Member Clark waiting to add his bit, so I give him permission.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To PS. Two things that I am happy that you have extended the invitation, even though I do understand that in the new role that I have assumed that I will be dialoguing with you a lot more in time to come, as early as sometime in the very, very near future, because we will be having our first CPA, which Suriname has taken on the task to host the very first one. And so we have planning to take place. But there are two matters that I would want you to pay some attention to. One, how well you can, from your position as a ministry and also from the ambassadorial position, to find out that we have 10 countries, including Cuba and Trinidad, Cuba to a lesser extent because they have not been to any of the assemblies for a very, very long time. But Trinidad more so. They have not signed. The date has passed for them to sign, and so they are at this point out. What can we do from a country perspective to negotiate and to argue the point to, if they are now ready to sign, if they would be given the chance to be a part, because trust me, Trinidad does play a great role in the whole aspect of it, and it would be a bit disappointed to know that we as a region is carrying on without the input of Trinidad, which is one of the larger island states here. Secondly, that with all information that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has at their disposal, Jamaica on a whole, the populace, does not have all of that information. And I am reaching out to you, I beseech, I beg, I implore of you, Madam Pierce, that you take on as one of the sideshow, because I know you have a very, very busy schedule to deal with just about all the other countries that we are in a relationship with. But to have somebody take on the PR department, the section that upgrades and upload and advance your website so that it is easy. A 1, 2, 3 see the ABC situation where somebody will hear you speaking here, didn't get all the information, and say, I want to find out more, and with a click of a button, they can have everything at their disposal. And once again, I want to say to you, thank you for coming. I didn't know that I would be so refreshed, so to speak, even though I do have some of the information. But yourself and your team have done very well this morning. And I would love for the John public to feel the way that I am feeling at this time.
Okay, okay, Member Jackson.
Just one quick. It would be remiss of me, Mr. Chairman, would be severely remiss of me that as we gather to discuss the Samoa agreement, that we don't acknowledge the genesis of it back in 1975, for which Jamaica played emphasizing a pivotal role in mobilizing members states in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific to bring about some equity and to redress some of the developmental atrocities brought about by imperialism. And the Samoa Agreement and its predecessors is one such document that sought to bring about some redress that we gather here to discuss.
Thank you very much, Member Jackson, for sounding that trumpet. I want to take this opportunity to thank the team from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade for your presentation here today, and we look forward to the continued support as we seek to address issues concerning our country. Thank you again. Thank you. And I will now ask that if you so desire, you may leave.
Thank you, Chair. You've been most gracious, and we appreciate the time. And my team and I are happy to have been here. Thank you.
Thank you.
We leave, so we'll continue after you.
Members, as we mentioned previously, we want to look at the next item, item 8, which is any other business. And
well, coming out of the last meeting, we had decided that we're going to look at 80. So could we agree on our next meeting date for that? So that's one thing we could decide on today. And secondly, in addition to 80, Chairman, we have to consider any other areas. Because as I mentioned in the discussion with Foreign Affairs, one of the role of the committees, the information provided here is not just for the members of the committee, it's for the broader society. And that's why you have parliamentary committees to provide that forum. And not only to talk to them, but also for them to talk to us through submissions that they can make. And in order to have that kind of participation, then we have to plan an itinerary of areas and through the parliament notify the public that they can make submissions, something we do from time to time. Make submissions, and if there's any group or individuals who wish to come to the parliament and make a brief presentation, they can't come and speak forever. The committee, the committee acts on behalf of Parliament. So when you speak to the committee, you're speaking to through the Parliament. No, the committees. Because what we do as committee, we have to submit a report to the full House of Parliament. That's the channel through which the country and the ordinary people can speak to the Parliament. So I think we can do that. We can start with 80, and we can ask, this is public for persons to contact the Parliament and to make submission, and the Parliament to circulate a notice in the newspaper periodically advising and to allow them to make such submissions. Note to Mr. Chairman that the last time we met was April 11th last year. That's over a year ago. It means that we're not doing our work sufficiently, and we have to fix that up.
What we are discussing here now is part of fixing it.
Fixing it. So,
right.
yes.
So we will decide now on a tentative date, seeing that the membership is small. No, I mean the attendance. We could set a tentative date for a discussion on the situation in Haiti. Maybe you want to suggest members. When?
I know, I was just saying, Chair, that given that the days or slots for committee meetings can be limited, it's important for us to try to plan from now based on the next available dates. So if we could hear the next 1 or 2 available dates, we could make some decision.
Mr. Chairman, also what my colleague should
We have an available date for Tuesday, the 21st of May.
21st of May?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can set that tentatively.
Yes.
Member Clark?
No, I just wanted to say to my colleague that he must be mindful of the fact that our internal external committee is really a more reactive than a proactive one, in the sense that most time it is a situation that arises that we have to deal with. In the terms of we mentioning Haiti, we are proactive enough to set a date to deal with that situation. So it tends sometimes to have us not meeting as often as a PAC or a PAAC. So we just want to bear that in mind. But I do agree with him that Parliament, the website itself, these are committee meetings that can readily, the information that is shared here, can readily be uploaded on parliamentary website for students and Jamaicans on a whole to get the information just the same.
Member Jackson?
Yeah, I agree in part with what my colleague said, but we have to also keep abreast of some of the things to react to. The date, could you just correct me? The 21st of, is it May? The time?
We want to put it normally for the morning because...
Morning, okay.
Yeah.
No, just want to know.
Yeah. So we set it tentatively and then we advise the secretary and the clerk will advise the other committee members and also the ministry who we do have to invite back here. So
And while we're at it, we can contemplate any other issue that we might want to consider for after the 21st of next month. That's a month away from now, you know. It's a long time.
21st. So, yeah, well, I think when we round robin with members.
We can just, okay, fine.
Yeah. All right, I want to take this opportunity to thank our able clerk and thank you as members of the committee for being here today, and we look forward to the continued deliberation and issues concerning this committee. Thank you again for coming. This meeting now stands adjourned.
Closing out for now, this is One Avenue News. Avenue for your news, views, reviews, and much more. New spot on the block where we chat. Looking forward to meet you in the comment section. So flick the subscription button, turn on notification bell. Let's journey together. And please remember, we need solution, not confusion. United we win, my people. Art of love.